the only reason at that point that I could reconcile being at Red Bull was because I was scared of losing the health insurance and the paycheck and some of the security, which are good things to be worried about losing. But I was 25. I didn't have a kid. I didn't have a dog. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have everything I had fit in a backpack. Like, I didn't need to be scared of losing those things in that season, particularly if there was impact allowed. And I just thought about, like, 15-year-old punk rock Ryan would have punched me in the face if he knew that. And so that was a moment for me. I was like, yeah, I think that's God telling me it's okay to like if I'm just scared of those things, that's not something I should be scared of and making a decision. And so that's when the journey started. And September 2015 is really when I left Red Bull. But it was a cool wrestling from a faith and work standpoint for me. And then, yeah, fall of 2015 is really when the Feast Over Famine journey started from that standpoint.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine Podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
All right, everyone, welcome to another episode and the start of another season of the Feast Over Famine podcast, which we're super excited for. We're excited for the stories we're going to tell on this season, but we really wanted to take a step back, and we have an episode 0 of the podcast that we've had for a long time. I recorded it early 2020, which doesn't seem that long ago, but in the story of our organization was a long time ago. And we've learned a lot since then and changed a lot. And we just started to realize that although the story to that point is familiar and the same, as we direct people to listen to episode 0 to learn a bit about us and explore who we are and what we're doing and stuff, it left a lot kind of unsaid from the past few years. So we thought we'd do a half of an episode 0 refresh and maybe a different perspective on what we're focused on and what we're working on. And I'm sure in another 2 or 3 years that'll change, but that was the intention for today. And so hopefully both episodes work well, and some people might find episode 0 better and some might find this one better, but it should be a lot of fun. And we get to have Eileen on today. Eileen's a awesome member of our team. Eileen joined in the summer of 2021 with Feast Over Famine and has really just adapted this whole social enterprise impact investing realm, and most of the behind the scenes of our marketing and our podcast and operations and everything is Eileen. So Eileen, welcome to your first live episode of the podcast here.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be on. Yeah, I do all the back end, but this will be the first on the podcast. So it should be fun.
You're public facing now. It's good.
Oh, man. I don't know if you want that.
That's awesome. Well, and we had Erica for a long time. And if anyone's like, didn't Erica used to do some of this stuff? Erica is officially in Swaziland, East Swatini in Africa with her husband, Maklisi, and their kids doing missions. And it is awesome. And we're so stoked for them. And so a new season of the podcast is also having Eileen on these internal episodes to explore and talk about all that stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah.
So Eileen, what are we talking about today? You're in charge because we all know that I'll pontificate and ramble and my brain's all over the place and we've got a baby on the way and I'm all over the place. So your job is to keep us to where everyone says that was a good episode. And so you're in charge and we'll go from there.
Great. Well, I think we want to, I know we have a lot of information, cool stories on episode 0. So really, if you haven't listened to episode 0, take a minute and go listen to that because you really get an intro to who Ryan is and who we are as an organization and how we got to Feast Over Famine. But for those who haven't listened to that, can you give we're going to dive in just a little bit to your history, Ryan. And starting back kind of 2015, can you tell me first, how did you become a Christian? Let's get the story on Feast Over Famine.
Yeah, totally. So I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't grow up as a Christian. I would say I grew up in a culturally Christian family. Like I would have said, yeah, I'm a Christian. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus. There's times I would have prayed or not prayed, but I didn't have a foundational doctrine basis, or hadn't gone through like a cool catechism or anything to just say like, yeah, what does that mean? And what does that look like? And hadn't really allowed it to start affecting every kind of daily strategic and life move that I made. But the cool thing about God and Jesus is he just does it anyways. Oftentimes he just guides you. And so I ended up going to, because of those values being instilled at different points in my family, like I had kind of a moral, ethical basis and disposition towards those things. So that was definitely in me from how I grew up, but ended up going to Marquette University, and we'll get into my business background, but Marquette's a Jesuit school. And so that further cemented some of just like the impact heart that I had. Marquette and the Jesuits most Jesuit colleges are right on the edge of a very impoverished or just challenged neighborhood. And so they intentionally do that because they look at social justice really deeply in different things. The Catholic worker movement with Dorothy Day, there's so much there. I would love to get like a Jesuit expert on the podcast sometime to talk about like the history of the Jesuits and social enterprise. But anyways, like that really just formed a lot of that. And also growing up, I listened to a lot of punk rock music, which people are like, what does that have to do with it? But there's a lot of social justice and community and brotherhood and wanting to like, shake your fist at the system and the man. And I think that can be done in a way that is completely not biblical. And I think like the music industry has, particularly the punk industry, like I've had my fair share of PBRs and one too many at different punk shows and things. And there's obviously like drugs in different parts of those cultures and stuff. So there's a lot that's not good, but also I would argue that certain like communities and bands even speaking out against things are doing more than what the church is doing in terms of how they're looking at social justice and like making an impact. And so I had those things kind of wrestling in me and ended up like kind of long story is short, but like ended up just out of college when I was 22 meeting someone who's a Christian and started having conversations where we were like arriving at the same point over and over again. Me from my warped sense of like, a business background with how I grew up mixed with like, this punk rock thing. But I, in that season, I'd been feeling pretty like lost in terms of my foundation. And so when I was the way I was as like a young adult coming out of college, and that brushed up against the rest of the world. Like I had these strong convictions, but it brushed up against the worldly norms. I didn't really have anything to like put my faith in or my foundation in and say, no, I'm going to hold strong to that. If anything, it made me feel like the weird outsider in that sense. And I think as a Christian, we're called to be different. We're called to go into the dark places. We're called to like speak up and do those things and love people well. And we have a higher eternal hope for the outcome of that. So people might not like me. People might hate me. People might ostracize me or those kinds of things. That's okay because I know the purpose. But when you don't have that, but you still have those convictions, you feel like really lost and kind of outside of it and even like questioning all that stuff. And so I was kind of in that season and kind of growing and figuring out who I was as like a young 22, 23-year-old. And so met this person, we were arriving at the same point on all these conversations. It was really cool. And then, ended up having just like a season of like despair. I was like, man, if I make this decision, I'm going to go all in. And what does that mean? And also wrestling with my own like brokenness and sin and saying, oh, if God has been with me to this point, and that's true, and he's loved me and got me to this point, then the way I've lived my life is essentially thrown that in his face. And so really just reconciling my own just sin and the brokenness of that. And finally one Sunday night, just ended up praying, and I didn't know how to pray or what I was praying. And I like kind of like, not to over spiritualize it, but went into kind of like a trance. Like I don't remember what I prayed, but like an hour later, I kind of like opened my eyes and snapped out of it. And this weight that had been on my shoulders for like ever, but particularly that last month was like gone. I didn't even know how to explain it. And then someone later was like, bro, like the Holy Spirit's a thing and this is how it works. And do you not read the Bible part? I was like, dude, I just got into this. I haven't read the Bible yet. And like, I'm figuring that stuff out. They're like, yeah, that's what happened. And so really cool. And then got involved in the church and there's been a much longer spiritual journey that obviously in the realm of sanctification is still a wrestling in the coolest of ways every day. But yeah, that's kind of how I became a Christian. And I don't think on episode 0, I shared that as deeply. So maybe I did, but yeah, that's a little bit of that.
No, you did not share all of that as much. So this is cool to get to hear. And just, yeah, I don't think I realized how how much of an impact the social justice bit and conversations with another Christian and arriving at the same things, where I think Christians can have kind of a bad rap in certain circles for not caring about social justice, that was what brought you to Christ, is a really cool bit.
Yeah. Super cool season.
Yeah. Well, I know you mentioned a little bit about having a business background, but that's kind of a pretty big part of the Feast Over Famine narrative, is you having a expertise in business and some experience there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Really, I mean, the basis of Feast Over Famine, our mission is to navigate the tension where mission and profit collide. And so we just talked a little bit about how that mission piece was forming in those years. But for me, like, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My grandpa was an entrepreneur. He was a consultant in the newspaper industry. My whole family worked for a newspaper in our hometown. I think I had my first lawn mowing business when I was like 10 because I was annoyed and probably because I was racing BMX and breaking bike parts and needed to pay for it. And it's funny how that's the same narrative as my life now half the time. It's like, oh, wow, I'm spending money on bike parts like at 10 or now. But yeah, like, just always recognized just had an entrepreneurial energy on those things. And so, went to college at Marquette to study international business and finance. I like to say that I got enough finance to be dangerous, but not enough to be miserable. At the time, the financial crisis was happening in 2008, and everybody was getting these like either fired from their finance jobs, or they were going into like kind of just investment banking, which is really cool. But a lot of them were just like really unhappy. And it wasn't stirring in me something I was excited about career-wise, like the options. And so I did some finance, but then I went marketing. So I kind of got international business marketing as my degree with a little bit of finance mixed in there. And the international business piece was cool. I just always had a draw to like the international cultures and understanding the unique challenges in different international cultures, what that meant, what that looked like, and all those kinds of things, which was really special. And so I took a trip to Beijing and Shanghai, China, to study in China, some Chinese like business strategy and political culture and like government corporate stuff. And then took a trip to Antwerp, Belgium, studied at the University of Antwerp for a bit and got to understand like the whole European Union model and how all that works and currency exchange markets and a lot of cool stuff. And then the final trip that I took in that season in college was a trip to India, where we were blending social justice and social impact with business. And so we were consulting on small micro enterprises up in the mountains outside of some of the major cities and people living in poverty, and just consulting on different business models to alleviate poverty and send kids to school and do that. And that was my first interaction. We'll get to it later, but with social enterprise. And I loved it. I was like totally in my zone, like this international culture and seeing that stuff. It was also one of my first real international trips to experience like developing world poverty and what that looked like and wrestling with it. And I wasn't a Christian, so I didn't really have like a good basis for how to handle that. But, I think everyone takes that first trip and it's pretty eye-opening. But for me, I was able to, it wasn't like eye-opening, and I was just, it wasn't a short-term mission trip where I was like building a house and then I left or whatever. Like, we were doing businesses, and then that was sustainable. And so that it was empowering at the same time and really cool. And I left that trip. That was my junior year of college. And I left that trip saying, I want to do this every day for the rest of my life, but I don't have any money and I'm living on ramen and I can't pay my rent half the time. And so I'm going to go make $1 million by the time I'm 35, and then I'll retire, and then I'll do this forever. I made it till I was 25 before that happened. I didn't make $1 million. Also, that wouldn't have gotten me there. It's kind of funny how naive we are as a college student. Point being, I made it about three years out of college, and I was at that point. We'll talk about that's where this Feast Over Famine journey started. But I think that was pretty formative in my time at Marquette. And Marquette's an amazing, I would suggest the Jesuit education to anybody. I'm very thankful that I was able to be go through that and experience that, and how they blend just impact and with business and all those things. It was just really cool. And so from a career standpoint, my first role was with in sports. I'll kind of go through this kind of quickly, but I think it's important. But sports marketing with the Milwaukee Bucks NBA team was really cool. The second role was I was a financial advisor for a while with Northwestern Mutual. So running my own financial advising practice underneath some mentors, got licensed in that, and was, running financial projections and financial plans for people, but also it was a really heavy sales role. So I was having to just I blocked my college calendar to where I was only working I had classes like Tuesday, Thursday from 8 to 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I was free to like work. And so I just like worked those days and did cold calling, like 40 dials a day, and put a suit on and met with people and just grinded and hustled. And it taught me so much. Like we bring it up with like the same strategies and things, and the grind and hustle is like stuff we bring up with clients all the time now. And so that was a really cool season. I learned a lot. I realized that wasn't for me long-term. And so I took a role with Harley Davidson, the motorcycle company, and did some engineering, process management, Six Sigma, lean business, kind of continuous improvement stuff, which is really cool to be inside a big publicly traded company. I was able to liaison with the engineering team, mix with the marketing team, mix with supply chain and logistics, and play a support role for my boss that kind of managed all that stuff. And so awesome season. Absolutely loved it. And then in the same season was also working with a digital marketing agency, a very small boutique agency, but kind of got the agency vibe doing sales. And then we did web development. A lot of it was back in like 2010, 2011. So a lot of small businesses first kind of recognizing like what does the role of digital marketing and social media and email marketing, what does that like play for them? And so I got to build some strategies and things, which was really cool. And then left that and went to Red Bull energy drink and spent about 3.5 years with them, which was really like getting an MBA for me, and really powerful. Actually, they put us through some like MBA level management marketing courses, and had about 4 or 5 different positions, from distribution management. I helped launch an international video game with a sports marketing event. We did some data analytics, category insight stuff. And then at the end, was on the national accounts team doing sales inside of Walmart, Kroger, CVS, Walgreens, and a handful of others, kind of national account level stuff. And it was amazing. I learned a lot. I come from an extreme sports and music background. So Red Bull was like, I drank the Kool-Aid hard, and it was like removing Red Bull from me in that season was like taking part of my identity away. But it was, I mean, I would compare being at Red Bull, and I talk to people at times, and this is going to sound like it lacks humility. It's not meant to. There's certain organizations like the Navy SEALs where you're just like, if you go through something and you lasted, it's like trial by fire, and you have to perform at such a high level that you just can't really get rid of that. And Red Bull is one of those organizations out there that is that way. Like, you're going to get chewed up and spit out if you can't handle it. And you can't do things at a low level. It's the most intense thing you could imagine. And that's why they're so successful. And so but did that. And by the time 2015 had come around, from a business perspective standpoint, I was doing like 85 flights a year and 130 Marriott nights. And it was cool, but I was just drained, exhausted. And my spiritual growth had gone to a point, my faith and work journey, where at first I thought, from a faith and work perspective, like, I can't reconcile being at a corporate company and being a Christian from a social impact standpoint. Like, I didn't have a connection between those two. I thought I needed to sell all my stuff and move to Africa immediately. And so God did a lot of work on me in that season at Red Bull to say, like, no, like, you can have a huge impact here. You can be missional. Also look at the jobs you're creating and look at the life. And so it was actually a really cool place for me to grind and hustle and work hard, but wrestle from a faith and work standpoint. And then I think 2015, and I'll tell a slight story here and then wrap this part up. But I was cross country skiing New Year's. So it was like New Year's weekend of 2015. So like January 1st, 2015, we'll call it. We were cross country skiing with a couple of buddies in northern Wisconsin. And I was just thinking about it because I was pretty burnt out and like fried from Red Bull at that point. And I just had this moment. I was praying or thinking or whatever combo of the two it is that we do and call it. But I just realized, like, the only reason at that point that I could reconcile being at Red Bull was because I was scared of losing the health insurance and the paycheck and some of the security, which are good things to be worried about losing. But I was 25. I didn't have a kid. I didn't have a dog. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have everything I had fit in a backpack. Like, I didn't need to be scared of losing those things in that season, particularly if there was impact allowed. And I just thought about, like, 15-year-old punk rock Ryan would have punched me in the face if he knew that. And so that was a moment for me. I was like, yeah, I think that's God telling me it's okay to like, if I'm just scared of those things, that's not something I should be scared of and making a decision. And so that's when the journey started. And September 2015 is really when I left Red Bull, but it was a cool wrestling from a faith and work standpoint for me. And then, fall of 2015 is really when the Feast Over Famine journey started from that standpoint. And, it was cool because we say we wrestle and navigate the tension where mission and profit collide. And for me, there was mission there, but it really started with profit, like this, high end, very diverse business background. And when I left in 2015, I was like, what do I do with that? Like, it wasn't like I was just on a finance track and I could take a finance role and that was just what made sense, or just a marketing track, or just a sales track, or just a supply chain and logistics. Like, I was very thankful at that point to have this wide array of experiences and high level experience to be able to go into an organization and support with those things. But really wasn't like, I was 25 at the same time. So it's like, what role do you take? How do you do that? And I was super upset at the man, like shaking my fist. Like, I did not want anything to do with the corporate world. I was super frustrated. Like, I just wanted to live in my Subaru and like not interact with any. I was so burnt out. And so there was also that. I'm like, I'm not taking a corporate job again. Like, screw that. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, but I'm not doing that. So yeah, anyway, so that's how the business background kind of led to that point.
Yeah. Well, and it leads us right up to the cusp of how Feast Over Famine began and kind of drawing in. I know there was a season of a lot more business without the social enterprise necessarily, but then we kind of ended up seeing social enterprise be a lot more of your passion. So talk us through the beginning of Feast Over Famine and how we got more into social enterprise and less into just profit and business in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I left in 2015, I took a sabbatical, put it in quotation marks, to rest here in Colorado, and just backpacked and mountain biked. But I had a trip planned with Operation Mobilization, who's an international mission sending organization, who's actually a client of ours now. And we've worked with them on some stuff, and it's pretty cool to see that come around. I'd had a relationship with them, and particularly with their team in Europe. And so we came up with a deal that was a vision trip for me to discern if I wanted to go into the business's mission and become a missionary and go overseas in that field. And it was free consulting for them. And so I was in Germany, Moldova, Ukraine, Albania, and Finland on a month-long trip, 4 to 5 weeks. And as I was there, I was like consulting on them and strategizing with all of them on different business mission projects they had, business for transformation, whatever term we want to use, which is so cool. So I'm learning stuff because I'm like kind of new to that field, but I have like this business experience to bring. So then I'm adding some stuff. And for me, the plane's landing in every country, and I'm praying like, hey, God, do you want me to move to Albania? Like, I'll learn the language here. I'll learn Ukrainian. I'll learn Russian. I'll do whatever. Like, tell me where you want me to go. And a really cool trip. But I came back from that trip, and God was radio silent on a place, like nothing, which if you've been in one of those seasons where you quit your job, you are so sure of where you're going, you're like all this stuff, you put yourself out there, you go on these trips and you just have radio silence. It is so hard. But what he was so clear, he wanted me in social enterprise, impact investing. Like, that is where he wanted me. Super clear, just not a place. And so I was exploring with OM some sort of global role on strategy where I'd be in Colorado and doing that. And that didn't really pan out. And so that door kind of closed in that season. And then so I started talking to some nonprofits and ministries, and was really, the pendulum swung the other way, because I started talking to them like, okay, I don't need a lot of money. I'm not in it for the money, but what you're willing to pay and the performance that it's going to need to pursue excellence in this is like, there's a disconnect there. And so this is where some of my convictions around the nonprofit world started to develop of like, man, this is kind of broken. Like, this is fiscally unsustainable. You're hiring me for a role that what you're paying me for and what it's going to be required is a total disconnect. And I might be willing to do that, but if I leave in 3 years and is someone else going to do that, and is all going to be, and so I'm just wrestling with all this stuff. A lot of the convictions a lot of people have in the nonprofit ministry world, I think. And so started to really say, okay, how I'm annoyed at the business world, I don't want to go there. I'm annoyed at the nonprofit world, I don't want to go there. I'm literally stuck right in the middle. So what does this middle ground look like? And I knew what it was, but I just didn't have an opportunity to do it. And so you can listen to episode 0 to hear the deeper story, but I ended up working for an organization. I met this gentleman who, him and his wife had started a nonprofit. It was a 501c3, but it was a social enterprise around helping blind, visually impaired folks get employed at Fortune 1000 companies. And so him and I decided, in a little background, there's 80% on or underemployment among individuals with blind, who are blind or visually impaired. And so 80% is a huge number. And the government, I might get this kind of wrong, but basically the government views blindness as the same thing as like imminent death in terms of a disability. So it's like, whoa, they're like, that this is the severity of it. So they get if you're blind, you can get like a really good education paid for by the government, all these things. And so you have educated people, but companies that don't know really how to hire them. So it was actually a really cool season. And I went kind of 1099 contractor. That's where the LLC started for Feast Over Famine. At that time, it was called RDM Business Solutions. And I wasn't married. I mean, I was just like figuring it out. And I was like, all right. So I remember talking to our first attorney and, saying like, hey, how do I set up the LLC and what do I do? And so we set it up and I just went into a contract as a hourly 1099 contractor or something for that. And after about 3 or 4 months, decided that was kind of where I was supposed to be at the time and went W-2 with them as a full-time employee, put the LLC on the side, toyed with it a little of like, hey, this opportunity came up or something, but really was committed full-time to that until March of 2018 when I left that organization. And what we did in that time was really cool. Mike, the executive director, founder, and I really grew it. We took it from 150K of income to $1 million in about a 21-month period, which was awesome. 90% of that was earned income. So it was fees for working with massive corporations as a professional services agency or an IT technology company, which was really cool. Some great relationships around Colorado developed for me in that time that proved to be really valuable for the next few years. And I learned a lot. I got to use my business expertise. We got to do that and it was awesome. And so when March 2018 came around, I left that organization. Kira, my wife, and I, and I guess we're getting kind of into the backstory there. So I'll stop there for a second, but that's how that transition into social enterprise kind of happened. And then we can keep telling the story or not, but yeah.
Well, and so then from 2018 to 2020, I know you spent some time really trying to see Feast Over Famine or RDM business at the time really kind of develop. And I know you took kind of whatever clients would come around and you can definitely, there's more on that in episode 0. So listeners tune into that. But as we got to 2020, Feast Over Famine went into a pretty big rebrand. And we felt like there was kind of a line drawn in the sand and that line was headed towards social enterprise and the business for transformation, business's mission realm. Talk about that line in the sand and what really made Feast Over Famine what it is now.
Yeah. And you kind of alluded to it. That 2018 to 2020, early 2020 period we had about 30 clients. It was half random companies and things. We had a dog training client, a physical therapist client, all super fun. So tech startup, like random things. I'd say half of them didn't really care about the impact component. Not that they weren't people that cared about impact, but it just wasn't what they were set up on. And we never really even talked about it. And then the other half were like nonprofits and social enterprises and different things. So that was really interesting and really cool. And I was also figuring out what's our model, like what makes us unique, because it's 1 million coaches and consultants out there. It's not hard to find one. So what makes us unique? What are we good at? Why are we good at it? And how do we articulate what we're good at? And so at the end of 2019, I was really just experiencing like an identity crisis where I finally was getting an opportunity to thought lead and see where all these pieces of social enterprise, nonprofit business, impact investing, faith and work, like all this stuff collided. And I didn't feel like I had a platform for it. I didn't feel like half my activity really fit with what we were doing. And people didn't know us as that. Like people knew us as that, but it didn't stick. And so we weren't getting a lot of I was like, man, we have a lot of relationships. Why don't we get a lot of referrals? And part of the issue was like, people just didn't connect the dot, And so for me at the end of like, I'd sit down for lunch with a pastor and talk about faith and work and social enterprise. And they'd be like really excited. And then I'd talk to a business person about some of the same stuff. And I talked to a nonprofit person and I was like, okay, of my conversations, like 20% of them are potential clients. The other 80%, I feel like we're really called to be having these conversations and to thought lead, but our organization isn't set up that way. And so we're called RDM Business Solutions. How does that even help? And so even when I would meet people, I'd be like, okay, do I need a new client? Like, is this person a potential client because they want my business expertise? Are they a potential client because they want to know about the impact related part? Like what is that? And we still have I wouldn't say we have a hard time with that today, but unless our reputation precedes us, it is kind of confusing. It's like, wait, you guys have a lot underneath the umbrella. And I think we've done a good job of articulating all those details. But I just decided in that season, I felt God saying, hey, it's time for you to like draw a line in the sand, brand yourself as a social enterprise, impact investing focused organization, and let him do the rest. And I was like, all right, dude, well, I don't God, I don't think like there's a big enough market for that. So I'm committing like career suicide by branding that way because we're pigeonholing and niching ourselves. And, but that's what we're called to do, is to trust the Lord on those things. And so, we did that, and that's where Feast Over Famine came from. And so early 2020, we rebranded, we got the website in line with all that stuff, rebranded, and kind of launched the podcast where we could tell stories about social enterprise. And all of a sudden, within about 2 or 3 months, it just clicked like across our network. Like all these relationships I had, all this networking I'd done, all these people were like, oh, that's how these pieces fit. And then we started to get referrals where people were like, hey, I was talking to this person, they're doing this thing. And I was like, dude, why didn't you introduce me to them like 2 years ago when we had coffee? That's like crazy. Like what? That's a perfect client for us. Thank you so much. Also, and so it was just like a really cool thing to watch that happen. And the other thing that happened in that season was we became, one, COVID happened. And so it forced kind of a more digital networking kind of thing to be prevalent, which allowed us to get out of Colorado and do more national, international kind of things. And so we started to get clients in Ukraine, which kind of came from 2015. So that's a bad example, but clients in Africa, we got clients in Florida, and then we got relationships across the board. And so that was, a good thing that came out of COVID and the rebrand happening at the same time. And all of a sudden 2020 was like our best year ever. And then 2021 was even better. We'll talk about the rebrand we did in early 2021, but for 2020, that was a really cool season. And we'll also talk, a little bit of what was happening in those seasons. We'll talk about with the 2021 rebrand when we do, but it was really cool to watch that change. And I hope that's encouraging to anybody that's thinking about, okay, should I come up with this niche? Should I not? Should I pigeonhole myself? Should I not? I don't think there's a black and white answer on that, but if I'm wearing like a coaching hat, it's like, sometimes that is the right choice, even though it's scary. And sometimes you got to wait a little longer and not, but that was like a really tough, but like good decision for us in that season.
Well, I think another thing we've talked about in that is, the right timing for the Lord. Like sometimes it's the right move, but the right timing is also really important. And that faith aspect that we rely on so much is really crucial. And like, I just can think of a couple of our clients that we've seen, hey, this could be a possible good route for us to go. And it just hasn't panned out. And then all of a sudden the dots connect and it's the right move at the right time. And it's cool. I think one of the strengths that we have is being able to encourage our clients, not just in the logistics or the strategy or the business or the finance or the whatever, but the faith aspect as well. And to get to pray with them as well and be seeking the Lord on behalf of them. That's a really cool thing that I love about our relationships. Because we couldn't have done that in 2018. Like the rebrand at 2020 was perfectly timed. And that faith conviction for you was just at the Lord's leading at the right time and season.
Yeah, totally. And we were even, as we were preparing for this episode, I was telling you about how in that season, we were we still try not to be a super, for a handful of reasons, some security internationally, we try not to be like a super overtly Christian organization with a lot of Christian language on our website or things like that. I don't think that's particularly fruitful for us, but that was still a reserved piece when we recorded episode 0. And so I talked a little bit about it, but I don't think we went to the depth. And something that's just happened over the past few years, and we'll talk about this more later, has just been, we just recognized that's like a huge part of who we are and a large majority of our clients. And we don't want to like hide the value that's there and how we approach some of those things. So yeah, I think that's a cool piece that definitely came out of that as well.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, I want to take a quick break from today's episode and just share a little bit about Impact Foundation, who's got an incredibly awesome model of using impact investment, charitable dollars, and funding tons of projects all over the world right now. What if your investments could change the world? At Impact Foundation, they believe business with purpose has the power to transform society. Purpose-built for impact investing, Impact Foundation provides a streamlined way to fund businesses that seek social and spiritual transformation or make loans to charity, all while earning a financial return to grow your giving. Donors and investors have already supported more than 200 redemptive enterprises through their impact accounts. They provide needed fuel for companies that exist as a force of God's redemptive work in the world. To learn more about what they're doing in their Kingdom Impact Investing model, visit impactfoundation.org.
Well, as we talk about we did a refresh in 2021. What did you think our role was going to be at Feast Over Famine when we rebranded in 2020? And how did that morph into a refresh in 2021?
Yeah. I mean, I knew a lot about social enterprise and business and impact investing in our model. Like I knew a lot about that, right? But we had 30 clients in the first 2 years. And in 2020, we had 30, and just 2020, we had 30 clients. So we learned a lot. Like I was like, okay, that didn't work. This worked. Okay. We've done this now 20 times. And that exercise is really helpful. And it gave me, I think there's seasons when you kind of take a step back and you kind of spaghetti against the wall, I call it. You reorganize stuff and figure out what sticks, and then you reorient it and come up with new messaging. I think that's really healthy. I wasn't expecting to do it so fast, but we just learned so much. And we started to see, okay, wow, now that we've worked with 30 additional social enterprises, here's some unique challenges. They're like, just statistically, we could see most of them are facing this challenge, and this is really helpful. That part that we do really isn't that relevant most of the time. Here's the parts that speak to it. So that was just one part of it. Just like, wow, okay, we figured a lot of this out. We figured out the language, and we figured out the landscape, and we've made some cool partners that we probably want to include. And so it wasn't really a rebrand. I mean, we rebranded the logo and everything for sure in 2021. And I think that was a good move and made us look more professional. We also just redid the website. People ask us all the time, like, can you send us like a PDF? Not all the time. Every once in a while, someone asks us and like, can you send us like a PDF overview of what you guys do? And I'm like, well, we just spent a lot of time on the website, and it's like really well navigated, and like you can kind of just go through and see all the details. But if you want us to copy and paste in a PDF, we can. And so that's really, the website was meant to be that, but it was like a reorganization of how we articulate things, do that. We adjusted our mission statement, some of those kinds of things. And the other piece that happened was, in that season, we started to realize about 75% of our clients had a need for capital at the end of working with us, and they weren't equipped skill set or knowledge wise necessarily to go get that capital a lot of the time. They didn't have the network to go get that capital a lot of the time. And I didn't want someone to pay us, for a coaching consulting fee for a season, and then get to the end of it and say, well, great, we need $250,000 or $100,000 or $500,000. We need this bucket of money. And thank you for Ryan for all the help to get us here, but now we're just kind of stuck. So that wasn't really helpful unless it comes to fruition. And so we just recognized that it was a really easy overlap for us to coach and consult and help them prepare for that in different ways, whether it's stress testing the financial model, coaching them on the exit strategy and what they want out of that, and personal wealth building and all the pieces we've talked about in the impact investing side. And so we're like, wow, this is a cool overlap. We need to integrate that into what we're doing, and what the future that's going to be in things. And we'll talk about the future of that in a minute here. But that was the other cool learning that we really wanted to integrate, and really brought that around in a cool way.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's actually like the perfect segue into kind of what we see going on in the social enterprise spaces, and what's on the horizon, and kind of where we see things going and are excited about.
Yeah. So I know we talked about a bunch of things. Do you want to kind of throw a topic out there and we can chat about it, or how do you want to hit that?
Yeah, well, we have kind of delved a lot into the impact investing realm. I think, kind of like you mentioned, a lot more than we maybe imagined in 2020 for sure. And so what do I want to ask? I want to ask, what do you think the future of impact investing is? But I think for that to really take root, we kind of need to maybe give just a little bit of where we've seen impact investing come from, and how it's already evolving, and where we see it going, and what we hope for in that. Yeah.
There's a couple, it's going to be hard to do this like verbally without a visual, but there's a couple overarching, I think, challenges that are creating a need for impact investing in a cool way, or a couple opportunities, maybe even the challenge. And one of them is and let's just zoom way out. We just live in a beautiful, amazing world with beautiful cultures and beautiful people, and also a very broken world with a lot of hurt. And it's not like we just had the Afghan refugee crisis and then there's not another one. Then there's the Ukrainian refugee crisis. And so we can just look at history and say, we hope this ends. As a Christian, I hope Jesus comes tomorrow and it is the world's redeemed and restored. But we know we're called to make an impact. And so I think what we've seen in the past 20, I'm going to speak for the past 20 years, one, because of my age and what I can speak to, but also I do think there's been a revolution in this kind of stuff, particularly in the church. We've just seen, and I think with millennials, it's a good thing about millennials, even though I bash myself and millennials all the time. There's been just an integration of intentionality and impact into everything we do. We want that. We want that in our jobs and our careers and things, but we also wrestle with it. And I think it's easy to have that as a rhetoric, and then it's harder to do something with it. Like when I was leaving Red Bull, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. That was like a wrestling season. That was really tough. And so I think what we've seen is people start to wrestle with those things. And then as a result of that, we've seen the church and even just the secular world like respond with like a faith or purpose and work kind of initiatives. And then what you get out of that is either people inside of their for-profit companies saying, oh, we're going to integrate impact, or you get people leaving those organizations and starting some sort of social enterprise or going to be missionary. And now you get missionaries that they're not saying, hey, I want to go do street evangelism in Costa Rica. They're saying, hey, I want to go start a business in Costa Rica and employ people and do those things. That the level to which the number of people that are doing that now versus we're doing that 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, or even 50 years ago is so different. And so what that's done is created this massive pool of organizations that need funding and capital, startup capital, or continual philanthropic donations to supplement some of the gap of their fiscal self-sustainability or things like that. That's become more needed. And so if you've got a big pool of people going to make change that way, and they all need some form of capital and some capacity at different points, where are we going to go get that capital? So that's kind of one thing that's happening. The other cool thing that I'd say is happening in that space is nonprofits are realizing that they can't be on the if not every nonprofit needs to or can be on the proverbial hamster wheel of philanthropic fundraising forever. Some of them, that's appropriate, like a soup kitchen. I don't want to go into our whole social enterprise spectrum. We've talked about that a million times, but like a soup kitchen can do that. But maybe you can integrate an earned income model and you don't need to do that. And so we're also seeing that happen. And then those nonprofits are like, oh, this is really cool. And if we just had like $1 million for a capital campaign, we could buy this building, employ 30 people, do this, blah, blah, blah. We'll be fiscally self-sustaining in 5-6 years. This is awesome. And so again, that's another example, like we're creating all this movement and change to do that. What I think is still catching up is the impact investing side of it. You've got, even what that word means is very different. And so if you've got a 20-year history of businesses, mission, social enterprise, nonprofits, fiscal self-sustainability, if that's been faith and work, that's been brewing, it is still in its adolescent years, I would say. We're working with like an infant in terms of impact investing, just in terms of the sheer number of people that get it, are involved in it, are thinking about those things. It's much more complicated because you're dealing with regulations and tax write-offs and charitable contributions into nonprofits. If you're going internationally, that's a challenge. Are you investing in a business? Now you've got FINRA. And so going and starting an LLC can be, or a for-profit or nonprofit can be complicated enough. Now we're investing money in those and it gets more complicated. And so just taking longer to catch up. But in order to zoom out on that a little bit, we got a few podcasts we can link to and conversations we've had. Like the idea of whole life generosity, I think, is what I'm really excited about. And even what the conversations I've been having at a high level or podcasts we've been on is saying, what does the entire fiscal pool for a human look like? I mean, if you're going to make round numbers, let's say you're going to make $1 million in your lifetime, 20% of that is going to be on housing and this much is going to be that. Well, are you thinking about, hey, I want to live in a place that allows me to have an impact and be intentional? Maybe that means moving to the mountains so you're healthier mentally and that's a good space for you so you can impact other people. Maybe it means moving into a specific city or area to serve and love the people there. Maybe it means living close to your church. I don't know what it means, but intentionally thinking I am given a certain amount of money in my lifetime to steward. And how am I stewarding it well? That doesn't mean like not having fun or doing cool things or whatever. But it means like, how am I stewarding that well? And what does that look like? And so we generally only think about that, especially in the church, like, okay, 10%, I tithe, I'm good. The other 90% is whatever. And so I'm really excited about encouraging and inspiring a movement where everybody looks at whole life generosity and connects the dots of those things. I'm living in a place where I'm grocery shopping in a place where I can do that. I'm my investment portfolio, investing my mutual funds or my 401k is invested in companies that have impact related components or aren't manufacturing in poor environments or things like that. I'm willingly taking a lower return on some of my retirement money than I could get. I'll be fine because I want to invest in this impact investing opportunity in Africa that needs a lead investor. All those kinds of things. I'm selling a business. How much can I put into charitable capital versus starting an investment fund for impact investing and stuff? So I don't think we're at the point like that. The pie chart of people's money is so simple. Right?
Mm-hmm.
What a financial advisor would have. I want it to be so complex. And then I want to like help financial advisors and be people like that can help people just wrestle through uniquely what that means for them. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up the most generous, inspired, amazing capital that people are like, wow, okay, what do I do with all this now? And then that whole pool of people I was talking about, the nonprofits and the business people that are going out and making an impact that need this funding. Now we're catching up the amount of money that's out there for that. And so I think it's going to take several years before those two things catch up, just because they're pacing at a different level. And I'm encouraged because we get people reaching out all the time that are like, hey, can we have a part of the rebrand in the niche? Like now people reach out and I haven't talked to in like 3 or 4 years or more. And they're like, hey, I'm selling my business and I've been just kind of seeing the podcast and stuff on Facebook or whatever, Instagram story. And you have time to chat for a few minutes and just like brainstorm with me. Like, I think it's really cool. And I'd love to just learn more. And for me, I'm like, cool. That's awesome. Now I don't have we need that conversation to happen with like 1 million or 10 million or 100 million people. So I'm excited for that one. I don't think we're equipped to be the organization that goes out and does that, but we have a lot of partner organizations and thinking through like, how do we do that? And, the Faith and Work movement has struggled with how they're going to do that, what they're going to do. They've been really successful. And I hope we like learn from that and how the impact investing one does the like one-on-one discipleship. But I think that's how we get where we're going with that stuff. I've got some other thoughts, obviously, on the nitty gritty of impact investing, where to go, but overarchingly, I'm really excited about that. I'm excited for the role we get to play in that. And I think our main revenue source will always still be, at least for the foreseeable future, like coaching and consulting with the organizations on the ground. But that gives us a unique angle to speak into the impact investing space that I don't think other people get, because if you're just talking impact investing and you're only getting that level of relationship with the projects and the founders, you lose on some of that. Whereas we get to wrestle with the projects and the founders and wrestle with the impact investors and start to see like, oh, how do we make the unique desires and needs of these two groups meet each other as they're even building their theses from the beginning. And I think that part's really cool that we get to sit in.
Well, yeah. And on this like whole life generosity, like I think it's been cool as we've talked about just seeing churches really dive into what does it mean to steward all of our finances well, which, like you said, doesn't mean you don't take a vacation or move to the mountains and make sure that your mental health is in a good space. But I think as we see churches kind of paving the way as we look at even whole life worship and where worship, I think, is finally part of a discussion that it's not just a time of singing or a part of a Sunday service or maybe the whole service, but that really, as Christians, our whole lives are called to be worship in our work, in our parenting, in our friendships, in our sports playing, in, every single aspect. And one of those aspects is our finances, and not just our 10% tithe or whatever money donate or go on a mission trip or whatever, that it's not just that, but what does it look like to be faithful with the little given to us, like you said, at a grocery store or wherever it is. And just the fact that conversation is open within churches is exciting, but to then see that span into, what does your 401k look like? Are you investing in companies that have redemptive mindsets, or is it profit-based purely? And is that really what we want our faith lived out to look like?
Yeah. And wrestling with that, because I'll just throw something out there on me. Like, part of the wrestling is unfortunately, the impact investing space, like I don't personally, I'll just be vulnerable here. I don't have the money to like put all my stuff in like private deals with companies that I think have some impact and stuff and run like venture capital, private equity kind of style. Like that would be an unwise financial move for me and my family for like retirement. And so I'm going to put money in the market. And so now if I had a ton of money and my retirement was set, then I could wrestle through that a little differently. Or maybe there's a point where God says, hey, I don't care if you think that that's a bad idea, do it. And I'm convicted of that. And so that's what's so cool though. It's like, I think sanctification and spiritual development, like in our mission, navigate the tension where mission and profit collide. Like it's not the same answer for everybody. And I love getting to wrestle through that with people. And I think that's the beautiful part is like some of our clients might meet an impact investor and it seems like a perfect fit. And it's just not, they're just not aligned on what they both need and feel called to do. And that's okay. And then when those two things do match up, it's really, really cool. And so, yeah, I don't know. I could talk about that forever just because that whole life generosity wrestling is just in worship, like you said, is so cool and so awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think as we kind of, I know we're wrapping up a little bit as we get this, I want to leave us with a takeaway if we can. And so I wonder, like, give us your thoughts on, I know we've talked a little bit throughout the podcast on this, but how can our listeners get involved? Whether they're a major donor or investor, or maybe there's somebody who's only ever seen $25K in one place for like the down payment on their house. What does it mean for us to move forward and get involved and continue to see this space open up?
Yeah, we'll link to a podcast episode. I think we did like how to get involved in social enterprise today or something. And so I'll just throw out a few ideas. And because we did that episode, I won't go super deep on them. Like one is, everybody has an ability for impact right where they're at today. So if you just take impact investing out of the equation and you just look at like how the global economic system works and how to have impact, like everybody is spending money every day and somehow. And so start wrestling with what that looks like at just a base level. Think about where you're eating and where you're doing this. And I mean, you and I were even talking about a specific business earlier this morning that you've been wrestling with some convictions you have and how they're handling things. And if that's an appropriate fit for you, well, if you purchase from that business, then you're essentially supporting their profits and doing that. And that, I think you can go off the deep end on some of this stuff and you can be like, oh no, like I'm going to drive, I'm super stressed out. My kid's screaming in the back seat and going to this grocery store would be easier, but that one does this cool thing with their profits. And like, don't break yourself down. Like you don't go off the deep end, but I do think like a healthy wrestling is really good. So just one, how are you spending your economic ability, just your disposable income and even just your base stuff? Like you can have an impact with that. And that's something I think anybody can do. Almost anybody. Obviously anybody living in poverty or homelessness or things might not be doing that as much. And that's really, really tough and challenging. So we'll just recognize that. But I think if you're working to do that, the second thing is if you're working and have a job, which most of us do, such as listening to the podcast, like you have some ability. You're either choosing vendors you work with, you're choosing employees, you're managing a team, you're managing budgets, you have some form of influence that you might think is really small, but if you're working at a corporation, I guarantee that you might think, oh, this is a small budget in comparison to my massive corporation. It's a much larger budget than what a small social enterprise would have. And so thinking like, okay, how do I love the story of Nehemiah in the Bible, and the line says, I was cupbearer to the king. And I think we just undersell that so much. And if you look at the amazing stuff Nehemiah did and you say like, he was cupbearer to the king, like he literally, like some of my historical owners, like drank the wine first to make sure it wasn't poisoned at times, like a super influential advisor to the king, trusted role. And I think we undersell, like most people have a position where their boss, their manager, has access to capital, has access to how things are done. And you can inspire and do those things straight from where you're at. And so without even changing things or moving across the world, like you can do that and have that impact. And it's really cool. And then the next bucket is looking at like your portfolio. So most people, if they're working and they're kind of stabilized, they have a family, whatever, you're saving money. Maybe you have a 401k, maybe you have IRAs, maybe you're a little like sit down with a financial advisor and reach out to us. Like I'd love to have a conversation and help think through that. But like sit down with your financial advisor and say, and really start to understand where that money is going and how it works. Like if you're invested in IRA, that might be in mutual funds, and some mutual funds are just like thrown at some random companies and different industries, and some are not. And so if it's the same difference to invest in UPS or FedEx, and FedEx has decided, maybe, I don't know if this is true, but maybe they decide that human trafficking in the transportation space is a big issue. And so they're going to donate 5% of profits towards fighting. Well, maybe that's a good reason to just switch to FedEx instead of UPS. Now, not everyone has the time or business skill set or things like go that granular, but you can start to think about that kind of stuff. And then start to wrestle with what generosity looks like, There's the 10% rule for tithing as a Christian. You can do more than that. You can do less than that. We're not getting into theological debate. Like I think it should be a heart wrestling that happens. And we did a really cool podcast episode on the theology of sacrificial giving with Mark Halleck from Calvary Church here in Colorado, where we talk about that, but wrestle through that. And maybe there's a year where like you're called to not save as much for your retirement, or maybe you're later in your career and you say, hey, I think we're good. What if we just give more in these years? What if we strategically do that? So start just thinking about that whole portion and getting active. And then if you want to like get deeply involved, there's a ton of faith and work resources. We have 80 something podcasts now on our podcast and stuff. We'd love to talk. We've got a lot of partners. There's impact investing. There's faith-driven investor and faith-driven entrepreneur. There's Impact Foundation that's doing stuff, whatever offshoot that is right for you, whether you're saying, hey, I'm gifting a lot and doing charitable capital. We've got great relationships with National Christian Foundation, people who are pastors that are now running NCF offices, or people who are business people that are now running them. And so there's so many people out there that you can wrestle through this with, get involved with different ways. And I think it's once you land on what that is, and I hope our podcast is a resource and I'm down to talk to anybody about that, then kind of making some cool introductions and get involved. And then, if you have the money, go make an investment and donate some, invest others, and get involved and do that. And if you don't, there's a lot of other things I just mentioned in there you can do. And I think we're supposed to call, like, you should have stuff in the market. You should have hands, like no strings attached giving, and you should have everything in between. And so really wrestle with what that looks like. And I think it's a cool opportunity and a fun thing. So hopefully there's a few ideas that spark something in there.
Yeah. Well, and our mission statement being to navigate the tension between where mission and profit collide, that navigating, it's so personal, and it's a wrestling, and it's a constantly figuring out where you're going. And so I love that allows space for that. As we wrap up, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I'm excited. I mean, we've had like I've had a very interesting professional year, lots of ups and downs and things, and been amazing clients and a couple key challenges and just a really beautiful, crazy learning season. But like, this is what gets me really excited. And so my hope is as we keep doing the podcast, like, it just inspires people to get involved. And what I'd say is, like, when people ask me what I do, and I think, Eileen, you've run into this lately too, over the last year, you've had to figure this out. Like, and I think I coached you on this, like, for a while. I was like, well, we do coaching, consulting on strategy, financial modeling, and I had to start by asking people, hey, do you know what social enterprise or impact investing is? And what I found is, like, 1 out of like 50 people will say yes. And maybe that's even generous, and that's okay. What that tells me is, if this is something you care about, like, go be the person that tells everybody about it. Like, this is still like a grassroots movement that is counterintuitive to how the world's been taught to think. And I think when push comes to shove, it's challenging. And so, like I said earlier, we can't go talk to 10 million people. So get it. If you're inspired by this stuff, like, please get involved. And I just want to encourage everyone, like, get involved, tell your friend, inspire your company, do cool stuff, and an army of people caring about and doing these things is what's going to make a huge impact. And that's pretty special and pretty cool.
Yeah. Look, your punk rock roots are showing.
Shake it. Shake your fist at the man. Blow it up. I taught my son, Caden, how to say, fight the system and burn it down. And then I got yelled at by my wife.
That was probably wise of her, but hilarious for you.
We just had a rule. Every punk rock phrase that I teach him, I also need to have him memorize a Bible verse. And I was like, I can play with those rules. That's fine with me.
It's awesome. Motivation on both sides.
So we read the story about Jesus flipping the tables over in the temple. And then I was like, see, look, it fits. Oh, it's some bad theology right there.
Oh, man. Well, Ryan, thanks for diving into all of this.
Yeah. Thanks for joining, Eileen. And I'm excited you're part of it for the next season. So hopefully everyone enjoys it. And hopefully this upcoming season is really cool with cool conversations and really inspiring. And hit subscribe. And yeah, we'll go from there. So thanks, Eileen.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.